So is this why it's forgotten? Guys, I played each and every mainline Call of Duty release, and I found all of them enjoyable in their own way.
Come. Train go boom.
Well, okay, most of them. That is, I've played every Call of Duty except the elusive third one. When I was a kid, I had a PC, no consoles, and just so it happens, Call of Duty 3 released basically on everything ever made, except the PC.
Have a good nap, did we?
But Sir, I was manning the radio
You
and...
should have been manning a gun.
And the weird thing is, when we talk about the classic Call of Duty titles, they're all regarded really well. They revolutionized the FPS genre multiple times, achieved critical acclaim, sold incredibly, yet barely anyone ever talks about Call of Duty 3. I set out to find out why, brushed the dust off my PlayStation 3, finally beat the game after 14 years. Call of Duty 3 was developed by Treyarch, who even at that point were no strangers to the franchise. They developed the Big Red One, a Call of Duty 2 console spin-off. And their staff also included the developers of the original Call of Duty expansion, United Offensive. But after Infinity Ward's Call of Duty 2, which was released in October 2005 for Microsoft Windows and the Xbox 360 as a launch title, Treyarch had some pretty big shoes to fill. Activision finally greenlit Infinity Ward's idea to move away from World War II and into the Modern Warfare setting, which they were hoping to do so as soon as they released the first Call of Duty. Treyarch were given a mainline entry for the first time in the series to bridge the gap between 2005's Call of Duty 2 and 2007's Modern Warfare. PlayStation 3 release was coming up, and Call of Duty 3 was set to once again capture the launch title timeframe, just as Call of Duty 2 did for the Xbox 360. Treyarch were given 8 months of development time and utilized their own engine for the final time, Treyarch NGL, which they previously used in the Big Red One. Call of Duty 3 is also the first and only mainline title not to release on PC, as well as the only mainline title to release on PlayStation 2 and the original Xbox. PC port was in development, but they cancelled it due to limited time. Also, it probably wouldn't have made sense to delay it, since Modern Warfare was just around the corner. Call of Duty 3 was released in November 2006 for Xbox 360, Xbox, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 2, and the Nintendo Wii, to a mostly positive reception and great sales numbers. For this video, I actually played the game on most systems it was released for, so we're going to compare the versions later, but for now let's focus on the PS3, since this is where I beat the game first. So how was it? Let's take a look.
June 4th, 1940. Nazi forces enter Paris. Within 10 days, they control the entire city.
The game starts off strong with a brief intro to the events that are going to be portrayed in the game. This is the first Call of Duty not to feature multiple theaters of war. Instead, it focuses solely on the Battle of Normandy. Specifically, the Battle of Falaise Pocket and the immediate events that led up to it. Throughout the campaign, you'll follow the story of American, British, Canadian and Polish units as they work together towards a common goal. The player is introduced to basic controls in a makeshift gun range, which also serves as the introduction to the American story and their characters. As opposed to Call of Duty 1 and 2, this one prominently features cutscenes and is much more character-focused. Finally, there's some personality to these soldiers you're fighting with, and even though the characters suffer from some really common clichés,
That's it! I'm falling back! Frank! Frank, put the gun down! Let's just all calm down here!
You're not crazy enough to shoot me!
Desertion's a capital offense, Guzzo! Shooting you won't be crazy. It'll be the sanest thing I've ever done.
Generally, I like their progression and dialogues. The American portion of the campaign is the standout here, and also the most prominently featured with 6 levels out of 14.
You're no good to me dead.
What kind of pep talk was that?
While the US campaign has the most fleshed out characters and plot, these half a dozen levels are pretty standard early era Call of Duty missions. For the most part, you'll be fighting through the bocage or level to the ground towns, together with your squad and, as in Call of Duty fashion, a whole division of other allied NPCs.
It's a friendly! It's a friendly! Thank you, Jesus!
Missions are usually large-scale assaults on German garrisons or last-stand defenses. 99% of the time you'll be shooting your Garand or Thompson with nothing else remarkable to do. This shit doesn't count, but we'll get to this later. Fairly similar in structure to the American campaign is the Canadian campaign, except here everyone talks in a funnier accent.
Have pulled back to the ridge. We, mes amis, are going to take it from them.
All right, you heard the lieutenant. Get moving.
Lieutenant, is probably my favorite character. His dialogues and manners are hilarious, and is overall the most likable character in the game.
Learn a thing or two from you.
Keith, give Wilkins a hand, would you? Boy can't tell his ass from his elbow. Damn good to see you again.
Wilkins, you blasted idiot. What are you doing, my friend?
Little present for the Bosch. We call her Vera. Her twin over there is Lynn.
The British campaign sees a return of Major Ingram, who is seen previously in Call of Duty 1 and United Offensive. The player is a member of the SAS team, which was sent to help organize the French resistance. As such, the missions usually focus on smaller incursions instead of full-scale assaults. These levels were my favorite, as they broke up the monotony with numerous jeep sections, where the player actually gets to drive the jeep as opposed to just manning the machine gun. One mission is actually pretty open-ended and takes place in a pretty big countryside level, well, at least for Call of Duty standards. And if you're playing on the PlayStation 3, you get to use the controller as a steering wheel. And while the controls are too sensitive and imprecise, it was still a pretty fun experience, compared to the other 6-axis gimmicks.
7 kills in as many days.
We're going to need more paint.
And last but not least is the Polish campaign, where the player gets to drive a Sherman Firefly. This mission was a blast. It's seemingly structured to just storm through the level full throttle without stopping too much. The tank crew is very fun and chatty, and if you get lucky not to die too many times, this could very well be the most fun level. It revolves around taking out a German ace tanker, General Richter, whom the Polish first encountered on the Eastern Front and are now determined to hunt down as King Tiger. This is actually inspired by true events, and they even made the King Tiger's demise historically accurate. Look, as a vanilla World War II history buff, this was a nice touch. The other Polish mission is a defense mission, where the unit is tasked with defending the Hill 262, which reminded me heavily of Hill 400 from Call of Duty 2. On paper, this mission sounds fun, but my immersion was broken by a plethora of bugs and poor frame rate. And this is actually a great segue into the more technical side of Call of Duty 3. Do not play this game on the PlayStation 3. This seems like the biggest problem I had with Call of Duty 3. The PlayStation 3 struggles to maintain a stable 30 FPS. Yeah, not 60, 30. Now, I'm used to Call of Duty always being smooth as butter. Every other COD I played was like this except the ones in the 6th generation of consoles. But those games were structured with that in mind. Typically, there were less enemies on screen, the aim assist was stronger, and the frame rate didn't feel too much of a hassle because of that. Call of Duty 3 has many more enemies on screen. They're more deadly, there's much more going on, more effects, more screen shaking. You get the idea. I feel the game was designed with the 360 in mind, where the frame rate is actually targeting 60 FPS. And the gameplay simply doesn't translate well to PlayStation 3 without any changes whatsoever. Aiming at enemies felt like a chore. Forget about hipfire. I was abusing the snapping aim assist when you aim down the sights at all times. Turret sections were straight up annoying. I avoided machine guns more or less and just stuck to my rifle since it had aim assist. The anti-tank cannons are a death sentence. They appear towards the end of the game and are meant to be used against some APCs and tanks. The thing is, you have to rotate the left analog stick to move the gun horizontally and the right analog stick to move the gun vertically. Combine that with around 20 FPS, very inaccurate sensitivity and weird dead zones, and you get a not so great experience. Thankfully, the developers left some rocket launchers right next to the cannons, so that's good. I'm gonna be honest with you, towards the end of the game on my PlayStation 3, I was just waiting for the credits. It didn't feel good, I didn't have fun. And the frame rate wasn't the only problem. Call of Duty 3 has some incredibly annoying movement glitches as well. Sometimes you'll get stuck in open spaces with seemingly no reason at all. But then you look down and see like a tiny plank or a helmet, which made you stop like you run into a brick wall. That got especially frustrating towards the final missions, where it seemed to get more and more frequent. The movement definitely felt janky compared to other Call of Duty games. The hitboxes on some objects are pretty inconsistent too. Sometimes you'll be shooting near a car or a cannon and thin air will block all your bullets. But sometimes you'll be safe behind cover and enemies will still be able to shoot you. Okay, so now it seems I'm just shitting all over the game, but bear with me please. Let us first get the bad stuff out of the way before I start gushing all over it. Friendly AI is fantastically bad. I mean, just look at this. And staircases seems to be the AI's biggest nemesis, especially when the friendlies are advancing upstairs while there are some Germans in the floor above. Friendlies will just stop in the middle of the staircase, and what seems to work consistently is just to pray to a god of your choice. Enemy AI IQ isn't exactly the brightest either. The actual threat really is the sheer number of enemies and the very low frame rate. Some corridors are so packed with enemies that it was absolutely impossible for me to clear them out on the PlayStation 3, especially since sometimes the enemy AI will be shooting what seems like blanks and the other times they'll have pinpoint accuracy. In these moments I just abuse the shit out of smoke grenades, since enemies can't see you through smoke, then move up to some sort of cover near the enemies and pray to God the friendly AI moves up as well and does some shooting. What PS3 has though that the other versions don't is the 6-axis controls. And I'm not sure that's a good thing. Look, I'm a sucker for these gimmicky things, but here the 6-axis controls don't really work well. Mostly they're utilized in the demolition charge planting minigames, the QT melee sequences and in G-prides. In the first two the controls are mind-numbingly stupid. For the explosives minigame, the space and time continuum seemingly stops when you hit square, as all the enemies suddenly forget about you even if they're right next to you. What follows is the same exact sequence for the 15 to 20 times you have to do it during a single playthrough. Oh, and do I need to show this again? The two acceptable uses of the 6-axis were the driving sequences where you can use the controller as a steering wheel. But by far the best addition was bashing enemies with the butt end of your rifle if you swing the controller. More of this please, less of this. Okay, so after I beat Call of Duty 3 on the PlayStation 3, I was ready to shred this game to pieces. But while I was editing my video, my Xbox 360 arrived, which I bought while I was playing COD 3 on the PlayStation. I got myself Call of Duty 3 for the Xbox 360 and decided to try it out. And then something weird happened. I started enjoying the game. In fact, I enjoyed playing it so much that I played through the entire campaign again on the 360. And there's a reason I use the PlayStation 3 footage in the video until now. Can you see the difference? The 360 runs at 60 FPS, and while far from butter smooth, is better when the game drops from 60 to 30 than from 30 to 15, as is the case with PlayStation 3. Suddenly, the gunplay felt like the good old Call of Duty. Shooting felt great, and even the glitches in movement which I described earlier didn't bother me too much, since I could actually react to enemies if cornered. I didn't have to rely on smoke grenades that much this time around, as I could just kill everyone myself, and even the guns at the end of the game presented no big challenge. It felt like the game was made for 360 and then just hastily ported to the PlayStation 3. Still, I can't blame Treyarch too much for this, since the difficulty of development for PlayStation 3 is well documented by many developers, due to its unique and complex architecture. This is a launch title after all, and I'm sure they did their best given the short development time. But still, I wish I'd played the game on the 360 from the beginning. Though not everything is better here. The rendering resolution apparently isn't 720p, but rather 1040 by 620. But to be honest, the difference is minimal. Look, both versions look blurry by today's standards. A couple of pixels won't make that much of a difference, but a couple of frames per second will. The 6-axis minigames are gone and replaced with traditional analog controls. This made the QTE sections much easier and not as annoying on the PlayStation 3. Still, I miss the bash with the 6-axis. So let's talk about the general gameplay. The control scheme is now modernized and uses the layout we're all familiar with today. The triggers shoot and aim, Y changes the weapon, right stick is melee, the usual. One thing that you'll notice if you're familiar with newer Call of Duty titles is the lack of sprint. It isn't a big deal, but would have been nice nonetheless, especially since United Offensive had sprint way prior. The gameplay is accompanied by a soundtrack which is somewhat lackluster. The only track I can think of is the main theme, everything else seems to be forgettable. Also, I wish the soundtrack was used more throughout the levels. Usually you can only hear it during cutscenes and scripted sequences.
Nice work, boys. Check your ammo levels.
Just before this, I beat Medal of Honor Allied Assault, where the soundtrack is legendary and almost always in the background. Fortunately, Treyarch nails this in their next entry, World at War.
Take out those fucking PT bolts! They're our biggest threat right now!
This gets too risky. Should we abort?
Negative!
When it comes to general sound design, while I was playing it seemed pretty bad. The guns sounded mellow, explosions were muffled, and nothing packed a punch. But after I've gone through my recorded footage with my headset on, I realized it's actually incredibly detailed and overall the sound seemed crisp and realistic. I I played the game on a TV, and it seems the audio mix just isn't tweaked for this. Some more audio settings would have been nice to tweak ourselves. Instead, all we got is a volume bar. I'm sad to report though that the M1 Garand ping is pretty lackluster. So just to fix your hearing, here's a clip from Allied Assault. Okay, with that nonsense out of the way, let's talk about the general gun variety. As in general Call of Duty fashion, you usually start with one or two allied weapons such as the Thompson SMG, Lee Enfield, Sten, BAR and so on, the usual stuff. But just like with Call of Duty 1 and 2, you'll soon run out of ammo and how to pick up a German weapon. Now in previous Call of Duties this wasn't as bad, because the allies would drop their guns when they died and you could pick them up and replenish your ammo. But here the friendlies usually don't drop guns when dead, but sometimes they do. And even then only in certain missions, I don't know. It's also weird how all the weapons look shiny and new, straight out of the factory. I preferred Call of Duty 2 design with scratches and general wear. And another weird thing is how the weapon will change its model when picked up from the ground. Just look at this Gewehr 43 for example. On the ground it looks yellowish, but in hands it has this maple texture. It seems to me the weapon model on the ground is actually the one from Call of Duty 2. I guess they ran out of time. But this is actually one of the very few times the game reuses Call of Duty 2 assets. I'd expect this to be much more common, but I could barely spot any reused object. In fact, World at War, which Treyarch released 2 years later, reuses a lot of Call of Duty 3 assets, especially the missions set in Eastern Europe. Now compared to Call of Duty 2, this game is technically much more impressive. It may look a bit blurry at times, but that's because you're all probably used to Call of Duty 2 on PC. The overall graphical fidelity is improved drastically. The number of effects on screen like smoke, fire, dirt splashes, explosions is much higher. The level of details in geometry is also much better, with less artificial look in jaggy slopes and such. Overall, the amount of object is increased by a ton, and there's even some pretty neat looking destruction. Now, all of the destruction seems hard-coded and is pretty inconsistent, but if you don't pay too much attention, it really adds to the immersion of being on the battlefield. Grenades are abundant and red barrels are everywhere, and I'm just glad for this. Interestingly, both the 360 and PS3 have parallax mapping on some textures. This gives the effect of 3D surfaces, most notably seen on brick walls. It's not perfect, but it is impressive for a 2006 game. But what's even more remarkable is the quality of the 6th console generation releases. No feature appears to be cut, the only difference is the graphics for the most part. Now, I did play the old gen versions for a bit. I finished 3 levels on the Xbox and 1 on PlayStation 2. I don't own a Wii and neither the Wii nunchuck, so I tried to play the Wii version via an emulator and it soon became apparent that it's just not doable without the nunchuck. Still, it's very similar to the original Xbox, so it's not a big deal.
Getting a little tired of dragging your sorry ass around, Nichols. Come on, let's go!
I played the Xbox version via backwards compatibility on the 360 and the PS2 version via backcompat on the PS3. Now the performance may differ a bit compared to the original hardware, but the picture quality should be the same more or less.
What's your name? Nichols, right? Come get your gun. I got $5 says you can't hit 4 in a row.
The old gen games feature all the same levels, same gameplay elements, same audio and so on. But the visuals are downgraded quite a bit and many assets seem to be reused from the big red one. It was pretty fun to see the differences between the 6th and the 7th gen releases. Hardware received a pretty significant buff, and the gap in the graphics more than reflects that. Still, the 6th generation versions offered a pretty solid experience for those who were unable to upgrade. This isn't even the last Call of Duty for the 6th gen, as there was a World at War spin-off released as late as 2008. This should come as no surprise, since the PS2 was incredibly popular even after the PS3's release in Latin and Southern America as well as Eastern Europe, where I'm from actually. I really appreciate the fact that Call of Duty 3 exists for the 6th gen, and also that it's a pretty solid game, not just an afterthought. Aside from the graphics, the only difference I've seen in the first 3 missions, which include the G prize as well, was the lack of a shotgun. I remember there was a shotgun here in the trench on the PS3 and 360, but on the original Xbox it's missing. I spent quite some time looking for it since it's one of my favorite guns in the game, but I just couldn't find it. So before we end this video, let's just take a look at the side-by-side difference of the 360, Xbox, PS3 and PS2. Right off the bat here, we see the visuals on the 360 outmatch everything else. Compared to the PS3, it seems to be running at either a bigger resolution or has better anti-aliasing. The vegetation is noticeably more detailed and the view distance seems better also. Now the original Xbox, while looking much sharper than the PlayStation 2, seems to be missing some fog effects, and strangely, the vegetation looks somewhat more detailed than the PS2. But let's not get into too many details here. What I wanted to showcase is the superiority of the 360 over PS3 and also the parity of the 6th gen release with the 7th gen, aside from the graphics of course.
I got some good news and bad news for you boys. The Canadians have taken the Laysan River. The Poles have moved into Vimoutier to the north. Bottom line, Jerry's boxed in pretty good. We got him falling back towards Chambois.
So what's the bad news?
Chambois is where we're going next.
Call of Duty 3 is one of the most interesting entries in the series. It was made out of necessity, to capture the PS3 launch title timeframe and also give Infinity Ward some extra time to perfect Modern Warfare. Activision also felt like the World War II setting was still worth investing in, and so Call of Duty 3 was born. With just 8 months of time, Treyarch weren't exactly given an opportunity to shine or innovate. They stuck to what they knew best and perfected the World War II Call of Duty. The deadline was met and they managed to rake in PS3 and Xbox 360 sales, as well as the older generation of consoles and the Nintendo Wii. While the game wasn't groundbreaking, playing it now made me realize that the B-Team moniker, which Treyarch was called by well into the Black Ops series, even for that time doesn't sit well with me. And even though the short development time does show a lot, especially on the PS3 release, what they managed to achieve with Call of Duty 3 is nothing short of remarkable, and I'm sure Activision felt the same as they moved Treyarch into the same ranks as Infinity Ward. Call of Duty 3 is in a weird spot. It did nothing groundbreaking, but it wasn't meant to. It was made out of necessity, and is sadly overshadowed by the other classic Call of Duty titles. Should it stay forgotten? I don't think so.